It's 7:27. Stand by. Coming up, Hobica's free money question of the day. Also this morning, Davey, we're going to do former Congressman Bob Inglis will be in studio talking. He's on a panel, actually, here locally. It's going to be very interesting for you, Joe, as well. He describes himself as a one-time denier of climate change and feels that there's an opportunity here that the GOP must take. That'll be worth getting into.
Also want to talk about what the FBI director said yesterday in Capitol Hill, because everybody was
Scary.
focused on the
Scary.
tech companies,
Yep.
but I think
Yep.
what he said was a very important subject that we should all be paying
Well, I
attention
mean, right
to.
down to our water supply, our and you know our
power grid,
our power grid is not owned by an American company.
food.
It's owned by a British company. Now, I think we're okay with the Brits. However, I'm a little uncomfortable selling our power grids to foreign companies, personally. I have no idea.
Who's that?
I don't know. Quincy Jones is number 3. Allison Krauss is number 4 with 27.
Was that Jerry Krause's sister?
Could be. Could be. All right, in studio right now, he is a former congressman, once a congressman, always a congressman, former Republican congressman from South Carolina, Bob Inglis. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
This is New York State Senator Joe Griffo.
Hey,
Congressman,
Joe.
good morning.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you, too. I have some friends in South Carolina. I knew your former mayor of Charleston, Joe Riley, because I'm a former mayor.
Yes.
And then I don't know if you know Representative Neil Collins.
Yes,
he's a state
I
rep.
do.
So,
yeah, I sure do.
Yeah.
That's
Good
great.
to have you.
Well, thanks for
Are
having
you
me.
done name dropping?
In our mind, we're going to Carolina.
Yeah, there you go. We
All
can
right.
sing it.
Good tune right there. Okay, you're going to be on a panel already on, or you're going to be?
It was last night.
It was
at,
last night
at Hamilton College.
at Hamilton College, and I have to say, Hamilton does a tremendous job bringing in both sides of an issue, which is really what our college campuses should be doing today. I
Yeah.
love to be able to sit there and watch, but to hear people's viewpoints, and it's important to know all different angles of that. You are a one-time, self-proclaimed, one-time climate change denier, but I don't believe you are anymore.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, for my first 6 years in Congress, I said that climate change was nonsense. All I knew is that Al Gore was for it.
Yeah.
That was the end
And
of
that
the
was
inquiry
enough.
for me, right?
Yeah.
Because I represented a very conservative district in South Carolina, Greenville-Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay, pretty ignorant, but that's the way it was my first 6 years. Then I was out 6 years doing commercial real estate law again in Greenville. Had the opportunity to run for the same seat again in 2004. And so my son came to me, voting for the first time, just turned 18. He said, Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment.
Okay.
So step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis. Step 2 has a Utica connection,
Okay.
which is Utica and Antarctica. And you might wonder, what is the connection? Well, answer, Sherry Bollert. Because Sherry insisted that I go with him on this trip to Antarctica. And so there I saw the science. Mostly I saw the ice core drillings.
Yeah.
And so then step 3 was...
By the way, I wish I knew the connection, because I would have made sure that my friend Dean DeMore was listening this morning, because Dean was his chief of staff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you know who took you on a trip probably back then is Tim Clancy. Do you remember Tim Clancy? He was his guy at the when he was on the science committee.
Yeah.
Which Sherry chaired science.
Yes, yeah.
Tim helped coordinate a lot of these trips, and actually he was on one with Senator McCain. I don't know if you were on that same trip.
That's the one.
So Tim was with you.
Yeah,
Tim
yeah.
Clancy. We could have got him.
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So Sherry was, boy, when we look back at where Congress was then,
Yeah.
of course it was dysfunctional. But we had no idea what dysfunction really was until where we are today,
Yeah,
it seems,
yeah.
right?
It was, and, Sherry Bollert really just had such an outsized influence on Congress. He was a really effective member of Congress. And, of course, I was so glad that he insisted on me going on that trip, because it's where I saw that ice core data.
Yeah.
And then third step for me was another science committee trip, and really something of a spiritual awakening, which seems unlikely, right, on a godless science committee trip. But turns out that not all scientists are godless, because I was snorkeling with this Aussie climate scientist. I could see that he was worshiping God in what he was showing me.
Yeah.
He told me about loving God and loving people by caring about the climate. So I got right inspired. I want to be like Scott Herron, that Aussie climate scientist, loving God and loving people. Came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. That's a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
Note to self, do not do that in the midst of the Great Recession when you represent probably the reddest district of the reddest state of the nation.
Yeah.
Won't go well. Didn't go well
And
at
it
all.
didn't go well.
After 12 years, I got tossed out of Congress with just 29% of the vote in the Republican runoff. Usually don't lose that badly unless you've been indicted or something, you know. But I hadn't been indicted, although that used to be the case. I don't know now.
But
now
it was
you get
such
indicted, you might do better.
It was such a hotbed. That is true. It was such a hotbed issue, and it became very political. At one point, it wasn't political, but it has become political. And I think a lot of it is because, you know, Republicans tend to represent big business and represent manufacturers and companies that produce for America. And this can be very, very costly for them if done incorrectly.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is, Bill, is we have some unusual allies here in this thing where for a revenue neutral, that means you cut taxes somewhere else if you're going to do a new carbon tax. So you don't grow government, you just change what you tax. Off income is what I was saying. Reduce the payroll tax, the FICA tax that we all pay if you have a wage income. Right. You reduce that, you put on the carbon tax. The Congressional Budget Office says the bottom 70% of Americans do better because they get a fuller paycheck and they can do things to avoid the carbon tax. You know, you put on a $30 per ton price on carbon dioxide at the mine, at the pipeline. Price of gasoline goes up by 30 cents a gallon. That's bad news. Price of electricity goes up by $11 a month. But you got a fuller paycheck. And so Congressional Budget Office says that it's 70%, the bottom 70% do better. Only people do worse. People with big houses, heated pools.
Yeah.
We're for freedom at republicen.org, you know, the organization I run. If you got a heated pool, well, have us over in February for a pool party. Yeah. But once you start paying the full cost of heating that pool,
right,
the real cost of it, you're probably going to drain it. And have us over in May for a pool party. So that's our story. What we think is that Republicans have been the challenge is that the conversation about climate has been conducted mostly in the language of the left. We need to do with less. We need to sacrifice. We need to, you know, those sorts of messages.
Yeah.
But what we think is it should be a message of abundance. No, you know what the future can be is more energy, more mobility, more freedom as we invent the new fuels of the future.
Wouldn't you say that it's, and I'll let the senator jump in here in a second, but wouldn't you say that when being energy efficient, energy responsible is profitable, that changes things. And I think we're seeing that with the electric car. It's quite not there. It's not quite there as of yet, especially in the north where it's cold. When it becomes, when you can get a deal and save, that'll change everything. Don't you feel that way?
Yeah. When it becomes, and that's what most of us have to wait for it to be economic. For it to make sense for us. I mean, you have early adopters who, bless them, you know, they put solar on their house before it was economic. Mm-hmm. I got to wait for it to be economic, you know, and and so. But I was mentioning that we got some unusual allies. You know, ExxonMobil is one, and you might think, why in the world would ExxonMobil be for a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax? Border-adjustable, by the way, means we apply it to imports, so you end up collecting it from the Chinese. And the reason is they sell petroleum and natural gas, as their lobbyist told me one time. She said, Bob, the reason we're for it is if you put a price on carbon dioxide, natural gas beats coal better than it's beating it now. That's why we're for a carbon tax. And I said, great, Jeannie. I can go tell fellow conservatives you're just trying to make money.
Yeah.
What else would be believable?
Yeah,
you know, I mean, ExxonMobil, they're not a not-for-profit
They're
company.
out to make money, there's no doubt. Yeah. Senator Griffo, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think common sense would be a good thing, right? And when you look at things that you want to foster here, I also believe that from an energy perspective, and I was a former chair of the Senate Energy Committee, that you need a diversified portfolio, that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that goes to what the FBI director was warning about yesterday on Capitol Hill, basically about the threats to our society relative to the power grid and to foodstuff and our water. So my point is, when you hear a lot of these people talking about, what could and should be done, you have the hypocrisy of a John Kerry, who's the climate change leader and then flying around the world on private jets and things of that nature. It doesn't send the right message, I think, to people to be consistent. But beyond that is, if you're going to embrace things, when you say you want clean energy, and I have no objection to pursuing a clean energy agenda, I mean, we're heavily subsidizing right now solar and wind projects because we have a number of them, and there's no reason not to embrace it, but people have to recognize there's a lot of tax dollars going in there to make that competitive at this point in time. But even with electric vehicles, the costs are astronomical, and the reliability is still a problem and a factor here. For instance, in New York, the state is mandating that all schools have these electric buses, and the superintendents and the business officers and the transportation experts are saying we can't do it because they won't function as well as they have to and could and should, because the technology is not there. But beyond that, there's an astronomical cost associated with that right now that will be put on the taxpayer.
Not to mention the grid is not
right. So my point is, even when you embrace clean energy, the nuclear has to be a component of that.
Sure.
Because nuclear is clean energy. But many of these people, particularly many of those on the Democratic side, are saying, no, not nuclear because it's dangerous. But you've seen what they've done in Europe. They have transformed the nuclear industry where they've made it more safer and reliable, not compared to, a lot of people think, a 3 Mile Island and things of that nature. So I think that's some of the challenges that lie in trying to accept that there is a correlation to climate and what we're doing relative to policy and using certain types of resources. But on the other hand, when you look at this, what are we going to use now when you move towards all of the electric vehicles and the clean energy agenda? We're going to be using coal. We're going to be using, so there's a lot to this, right? And what you're doing, I think, is impressive. And Sherry was an extraordinary guy. I was one of his eulogists at his funeral.
Really?
And just a remarkable man. Had a lot of respect and admiration for him and for what you do.
Well, it's neat. Yeah, what you're about there is really important. Is that nuclear needs to be part of this solution. And what if we had our druthers at republicen.org, we'd eliminate all those subsidies you just mentioned. We won't get there, but we'd eliminate all the subsidies, including the biggest subsidy of them all, which is being able to belch and burn into the trash dump of the sky without paying a tipping fee. The dump here in Utica, I'm sure, has a tipping fee. If I'm Inglis trash hauling and I bring trash to the dump, I got to pay based on the weight of my truck coming into the dump, right?
Right.
Makes sense. I'm taking up space. The city needs to charge me for that. And I back that cost up to my customers, and therefore they try to get some of those cardboard boxes out of my dumpsters so they can recycle that, right? They don't want to pay me to take that stuff away. That's all good stuff because you're fixing the economics, and then the environment takes care of itself. And so, but if I had my druthers, I'd eliminate all the solar, all the wind, all the EV credits, and I'd apply this carbon tax. Revenue neutral, cut taxes somewhere else so there's no growth of government, apply it to imports so the Chinese are paying it, and then let consumers in the liberty of enlightened self-interest pursue their self-interest. And what they do is and companies pursue their self-interest, we'd build more nuclear. And what would happen then is that, I once said to the solar people, they invited me to come speak somewhere, the Wind Energy Association. They invited me to come speak. I said, listen, you know what I'm going to say when I get there? I want to eliminate the production tax credit for wind. They said, yeah, but you want to do a carbon tax. They said, we don't need the credits if you make coal accountable, if you make natural gas accountable, if you make petroleum accountable. We don't need the credits. And so that's when you get to the place of real free enterprise. Yeah. Free enterprise made accountable. It's sort of an oxymoron, isn't it? Accountable free enterprise. But in other words, where people don't get away with dumping for free into the trash dump of the sky.
Right.
If you pay for that, then things take care of themselves.
What was the takeaway from the panel last night at Hamilton?
That was the case I was making last night, exactly that. I was joined by a fellow panelist who was advocating the Green New Deal, and so that was sort of the contention there, if you will. Is I'd say the Green New Deal, great name, great that they created a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but it isn't a worldwide solution. And the key to this thing is getting the world in on it. Because, when I was getting tossed out of Congress back in 2010, it's aggressive disbelief about climate change. It's basically, I believe in climate change, you shouldn't either.
Right. I think we've changed, haven't we?
We have. Now the question on minds of fellow conservatives is, but how you get the world in on this thing?
Correct.
And so
we cut all of our emissions, but look what China's doing. And I had a conversation with someone about this yesterday.
And that was the point I was going to make. You do these things unilaterally, right, without it being done universally, becomes problematic. And a lot of the efforts that are undertaken, particularly state by state or even a community, is saying, well, we're going to lead by example. But that's not going to truly make the difference, because unless you have them willing and ready to participate, it becomes a challenge.
Yeah, and only the federal government can do this effectively, because only the federal government can apply the border adjustment, which is the key. And that's the thing that came out last night, is the great that the Green New Deal had a great name, it polled well, created enthusiasm, but give me the mechanism by which you get China in on this thing. And the mechanism is not an international agreement. It's not bowing and scraping at the UN. It's not protracted negotiations. It's just this bold move that says, we, the United States, are ready to act. We're gonna charge a tipping fee for dumping a trash dump in the sky, and China, you're gonna pay it. Now, you don't like that, China. Well, maybe you want to collect your own inside China, and that's the goal. Is it they get their own, we get our own, and then the whole world follows. Then you got 8 billion people seeing the difference in the grocery store between a paper plate and a plastic plate, not because of regulation, but because now the paper reflects its emissions, which are less than the plastic plate. Yeah. And the price of the plastic goes up, and consumers pick the paper, not because they were trying to be righteous and shine their halo or signal to their friends.
Exactly what we were just talking about.
It's because they say, well, this one's cheaper. And greener becomes cheaper at that point because it's cleaner.
It becomes by the way, we're speaking this morning, former congressman from South Carolina, Republican Bob Inglis, was a part of a panel on climate change last night at Hamilton College. And, I never thought in a million years we would see, now this is the economy, supply and demand, and people and their budgets. I never thought we would ever see, the little screw gun you have or the big one. Contractors will never use those battery-operated ones because they're not powerful enough. But guess what? You don't see anybody plugging in a drill anymore, do you?
No, yeah.
But that was not mandated. The economy produced that because it became, number one, a favored product, and number two, it was a better deal, and it worked better for people who were building homes.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And that'll be the case as the batteries get better on, say, the F-150 Lightning, and the contractor pulls up while the other guys and gals on the site are waiting for the temporary power pole. The guy with the F-150 Lightning is going to be plugging in his power tools and already working, right? To his truck. Yes, because the truck becomes his power support. Yeah. And so it's pretty exciting, but what it takes is good products, and good products follow from good policy. But the policy that we can't, what I'd prefer at republican.org is we not pick the technology, but we let the free enterprise system pick it. With one exception, I guess, and that is I would subsidize nuclear. Let me be clear that I'm not pure. Nuclear requires subsidy. The subsidy that is required is that you take, if Senator, I want to go into the business of building a nuclear power plant. Yeah. Bill, you society, you got to take our waste from us. That's inherently a subsidy, but we got to do that. because
Right,
otherwise
right.
we got an 800,000 year waste
Right,
product.
right, right.
We got to find a banker that will give us an 800,000 year term.
Yucca Mountain's not looking to take it either, right?
Yeah,
That's right,
And
yeah.
so that's something that society has to do. But and so is it perfect? No, but it's a whole lot cleaner than everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
And it's a whole lot safer. And if some of your listeners are doubting that, there's a great new film called Nuclear Now. Oliver Stone, liberal in Hollywood, did this film. And it basically says, let's reevaluate about nuclear, about how the left went against nuclear. The good news is that's coming around.
Look at Europe. The senator just mentioning that. I mean, it's incredible. Although Europe could do a little something with their air conditioners. They do not do well with air conditioners.
Yeah. Interesting about this nuclear thing. I was once in Rochester, and the Sierra Club wanted me to come speak there, and we said, we're republican.org. Listen, you get the Chamber of Commerce to jointly sponsor it, and I'll come. Otherwise, I can't go speak to the Sierra Club. They are already convinced.
Yes.
So they got the Chamber of Commerce, got to Rochester. It was exactly what I was fearing. It turned out to be mostly Sierra Club members, 300 people sitting there. And so they were loving on me. They love when a conservative says something, basically inherently critical of his party about how we need to act on climate. So they were loving on me. Then the question came up about nuclear. And I said, oh, no, my polling numbers are going to drop here in Rochester,
That's
here right quick.
And they did.
And so I said, we need to build more of it. Interesting. About 30% of the crowd clapped.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, they've got the new talking points. The others, the 70%, had the old talking points. The good news is that even the Sierra Club is starting to come around on nuclear because they realize, hey, which would you rather?
Right.
Would you rather foul the air with a whole bunch of burning, or would you rather have this challenge of nuclear waste, which is actually a lot less waste than you think, and that's what the Nuclear Now movie shows.
Where should people go? By the way, you mentioned it's Republican, en.org. That's Republic, en.org. That's your website. What do you want people to do? A lot of Republicans here right now. What are you asking them to buy into here?
Especially if you remember Sherry Bollert and really the importance that he has to my story about coming around on this. Sherry, I think, would be the guy who would say, yeah, this is what we've got to do. We've got to be people that are ready to innovate. And so if you're one of those conservatives who cares about climate change, join us at republicen.org. Take you about 45 seconds. All we need is zip code and email address.
Okay.
Email, we won't hound you for money. We got people to take care of that. It's just your zip code so we can show you, make you visible to your member of Congress and your two senators. They're starting to get the message that you exist, conservatives who care. If you're a progressive, show our site to your cousin Charlie, who is the conservative who rejects climate change, and let him see that, hey, there are conservatives, Charlie, who care about climate change. And so it's republicen.org, EN for energy, entrepreneurship, and environment.
Check it out, republicen.org. Congressman Bob Inglis, we really appreciate you coming in this morning in studio. Thank you.
Well, great to be with you, Bill.
All
Thanks so much. And Senator, great to be with you.
Good stuff. And the story with Sherry Bollert was just awesome. That was a great tie-in. All right, I have to break. WIBX Utica Rome. News coming right up, and then Megan Stone with the local update and a full forecast for you as well. It is 8:02 at WIBX.